In this podcast episode, Professor Robert Pape, a renowned expert in military strategy and political violence, shares insights from his 2 decades of simulating war scenarios with Iran. The conversation delves deep into the evolving conflict dynamics between the United States and Iran, the challenges of targeting nuclear material, the political implications of military actions, and the risks facing U.S. leadership under President Trump. Pape provides a framework for understanding the conflict's escalation stages, the consequences of leadership changes in Iran, the role of regional players like Israel and Gulf states, and the broader geopolitical impact involving China and Russia. The discussion further explores the domestic repercussions of prolonged foreign engagements and shifts in global power. Professor Pape explains that bombing campaigns do not merely destroy targets, but fundamentally change the political landscape of both the attacked country and the attacker. This transformation often leads to what he calls the escalation trap, where initial tactical successes mask strategic failures. Despite the precision of modern smart bombs that demolish targets with remarkable accuracy, the political consequences create momentum for ongoing conflict. The enemy adapts or becomes more resilient, and the initiator faces growing difficulties in controlling the situation, leading to unintended escalation. Pape has run extensive war simulations involving Iran for over 20 years, including detailed exercises conducted just before bombing campaigns began. These simulations reveal a critical gap. While advanced stealth bombers like the B-2 can successfully destroy physical nuclear facilities like Natanz and Fordo, the exact locations of enriched uranium remain unknown. Iran possesses enough enriched uranium for approximately 16 nuclear bombs, but the U.S. cannot currently pinpoint this material's whereabouts, especially since Iran anticipates such attacks and prepares to disperse critical components. This uncertainty complicates U.S. military strategy and fuels fears of a prolonged conflict with ill-defined objectives. Contrary to perceptions of a fragile or easily disrupted regime, Iran's political structure resembles a complex matrix, not a brittle entity like a game of Jenga. When the U.S. eliminated the supreme leader, who had issued religious edicts, fatwas, against nuclear weapons, the intended destabilization instead empowered a more aggressive successor. This new leader lacks the moderate constraints of his predecessor and commands significant influence within the Revolutionary Guard, the elite military force fiercely loyal to the regime. Thus, rather than weakening Iran, the targeted killing hardened its leadership and increased incentives to develop nuclear weapons as a survival strategy. Pape outlines 3 stages of the Iran conflict. Stage 1 involves precise bombings that achieve tactical gains but fail strategically. Stage 2 is characterized by regime change efforts and Iran's retaliation, primarily through missile and drone attacks targeting Israel and Gulf states to fracture regional coalitions aligned against Tehran. These retaliations impact regional economies, particularly tourism, and sow public dissent against support for U.S. and Israeli policies. The third stage, which Pape estimates has about a 75% chance of occurring soon, would involve U.S. ground forces deploying to Iran to locate and secure dispersed nuclear materials, a move that risks further escalation and political entanglement reminiscent of past prolonged conflicts like Vietnam or Afghanistan. Israel's actions have significantly influenced the trajectory of the conflict. Israeli operations, including assassinations and bombings of Iranian officials and nuclear facilities, have at times derailed potential diplomatic solutions. Pape highlights the delicate and complicated relationship between the U.S. and Israel, noting that American leadership faces domestic political pressures that limit its ability to restrain Israeli military initiatives. Meanwhile, Iran's retaliatory attacks against Israel and Gulf Cooperation Council countries are designed to erode regional alliances and pressure the U.S. to withdraw. These dynamics intensify the complexity of conflict management in the Middle East. Drawing parallels with past insurgencies and terrorist campaigns, Pape emphasizes the likelihood of Iran or its proxies escalating attacks beyond the Middle East if U.S. troops enter Iranian territory. He cites historical examples such as Chechnya and ISIS, where assassination and terrorism followed leadership decapitations, intensifying conflicts. The dispersal of nuclear material also raises the risk of it being transferred to militant groups like Hezbollah or the Houthi rebels, potentially threatening U.S. allies and interests far beyond Iran's borders and heightening fears of terrorist nuclear or radiological attacks. The conflict's implications extend to domestic U.S. politics and economics. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz threaten global oil supplies, increasing gas prices and inflation that affect American households and businesses. Rising costs create political pressure on policymakers and contribute to economic uncertainty. Pape connects these economic stresses to the democratic reality that prolonged, costly wars of choice lack sustained public support, making it politically fraught for leaders like President Trump to manage or escalate such conflicts without significant domestic backlash. The podcast discusses President Trump's challenging position in navigating this conflict. Trump is portrayed as a leader who thrives in chaos but faces a Hobson's choice: either cut losses by pulling back and accepting political defeat, or intensify military action with the risk of deeper, long-lasting engagement and adverse political consequences. With legacy concerns playing a significant role, Trump apparently fears being remembered as the president who allowed Iran to develop nuclear weapons and leave an unresolved crisis. This motivation may push him closer to escalating military involvement despite mounting risks. Pape highlights how the U.S.-Iran conflict is entangled with broader geopolitical rivalries. China benefits strategically if the U.S. becomes mired in another Middle Eastern quagmire, allowing China to advance its economic and technological ambitions, particularly in AI and manufacturing hubs like Wuhan. Russia's role includes providing Iran with intelligence to target U.S. and allied assets, mirroring tactics seen in the Ukraine conflict. Both powers appear to support prolonging the conflict to distract and weaken the United States, reshaping global power dynamics in their favor. Beyond foreign policy, Professor Pape warns about the increasing normalization of political violence within the United States itself. Over the past decade, the country has witnessed a resurgence of violent riots, political assassinations, and militarized law enforcement operations. This internal destabilization threatens America's social fabric and democratic institutions, posing a potentially greater long-term danger than external conflicts. If unaddressed, escalating domestic political violence could further weaken the U.S.'s global leadership role and national cohesion. Pape urges a reconsideration of current strategies, advocating for renewed diplomatic efforts to freeze Iran's nuclear program rather than continued military escalation. He underscores the impossibility of achieving perfect security through force alone and highlights historical lessons where wars of choice tended to produce prolonged, unintended consequences. The potential for Iran to acquire nuclear weapons is presented as a risk partly born from exacerbated incentives created by aggressive U.S. policies. Without a strategic shift, the path forward likely leads to further escalation, ground invasions, and broader regional and global destabilization.